Welcome back to another Hacker Hangouts. We delayed a little bit, and I am excited, though, because we are talking DEF CON Darknet. I have my DEF CON sweatshirt on, which I am like, we even just mentioned DEF CON last week, and immediately, like, my mind has been nowhere else but DEF CON. Like, double checking, like, booking. I called all the employees at my company saying, like, we're doing things, we're doing beautiful things. But we talked about Darknet and where that has been and where it's going, some of the challenges along the way, and that's what I wanted to talk about this week, specifically diving into like how we create challenges for hackers, some of like the story. Something to mention right away is that this is only 4 people on a much, much larger team for Darknet. But jumping in, like, so I started as a player, and then I eventually was asked to join the team. I joined the team. Gator, can you just like talk like 30 seconds? What is Darknet? What is it at DEF CON?
So the Darknet contest is a real-life MMORPG where you learn real-life skills and you get in-game points for it. The cool thing is that we're trying to help build community and assume that we've got no prior knowledge coming in. So we stair-step or Lego building block style, teaching you about a subject and then give you a quest to go learn more about it. And then after a couple of other, I would say, learning challenges or quests, we send you on a quest to go actually challenge what you've learned. Hey, can you read around the areas that we taught you? Can you go look at the documentation, or can you apply your knowledge you just learned into this bigger problem that you now have to solve?
So high level.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, I was going to say, so high level, typically when it started, it was at DEF CON. You had to be there. You showed up. You joined like this. You walked up to this table. And the thing I loved about the contest, or we'll call it contest, but like it was all about community. But on the other side of things, you got to learn a little bit of everything. There was hardware hacking. Yes. There was social engineering. There was wireless hacking. There was Gowry's reverse engineering, which was awesome. But it was a great way to just kind of learn about DEF CON and the conference because it sent you to different places and then building a bunch of skills. But then there was also like the Gulo challenges thrown in, which were like these random ones, which it felt like a red herring. But then as you went down it, you're like, this is a real quest. This is leading somewhere, and it's mostly leading to somewhere terrifying. That is something you have to keep in mind. They're always terrible. They're always horrible. There is not a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow.
But you do always learn something. You may wish you didn't learn that thing, but you do always learn something. I have to give him credit. He actually makes really solid technical challenges. Every challenge he makes, well, except for that one that time where he put that stuff in that place. But, you know.
There is always something to learn with his challenges. A place to start. So much of this Gator was talking about was just quests and really ultimately building challenges for hackers. And the thing I loved about Darknet as a player was you had this great combination of simple and easy, but also like highly technical. When you were designing challenges, how did you balance it? Like, did you create things like red herrings into your challenges, or you just let those things happen naturally? Because as a player, I have a very strong opinion on red herrings.
So whenever everybody builds quests differently, and to your point of, hey, building it for beginners versus people that are more advanced, I don't like to put red herrings inside of my quests that I build. Some people naturally like to go through and do that. And to be honest with you, building a quest is not easy. You have to be able to know a subject well enough to be able to teach it, and then be able to say, hey, I'm going to give you a written format to learn how to do X. And now you learn to become a better quest builder over time. So no, I don't like to put red herrings in there. There's typically hints or Easter eggs that are put in there purposely to make sure you're going down the right path. Mm-hmm. But everybody here is written. So I don't English good.
It's rootin'. It's actually rootin'.
That's what they an R, right? Rootin'.
But yeah, we've all written quests, and what we call quests hacking challenges, regardless if that are internal, because typically it's quest as part of an epic, which epic would be physical security, and then there'd be like a lockpicking challenge or a lockpicking quest, and those things funnel into a larger category. Gowry?
Skill trees, right?
So, it's kind of interesting because it goes back to, we have this debate, I think, every year where we have this question of, are we a contest? Are we trying to teach people something? Are we closer to a village? So for example, my quests are a reverse engineering and exploitation challenge, and it basically walks you through Baby's first buffer overflow and the various ways that you can exploit stack buffer overflows up to and including return-oriented programming. So if you're familiar with that, I actually have a couple of challenges that make you forget about just running directly on the stack. You actually have to return to libc or return to some other function. And the way I have it set up is over the course of about 8 to 9 challenges, I introduce, what is a buffer overflow to begin with? Like, here, just trigger the bug. Don't actually exploit anything, just trigger it. And if you can hit this condition, you get a flag, right? And so the idea is like, I went through 5 years of computer science training to like understand, larger computer science realities. And I got to say, like, it's hard enough, like just approaching one of these problems. And this is the case across many things, just approaching any one of these challenges. People who have done it for a while take for granted just how much information it takes to solve even the basic level challenges, right? Because we're like, oh, I'm going to exploit a buffer overflow. It's like, well, do they know C? Do they know what a stack is? Do you know what a stack is in terms of, a computer architecture? Do they know what a register is? Do they understand pointers? Do they understand pointer math? Do they understand what a buffer is? Like you have to start asking all these questions. And it may sound, what is the term, patronizing to kind of break it down that way, especially for anyone who has done this before. But I've now spent, 5-6 years in, working with everyone from seasoned penetration testers all the way down to people who have never done a hex, conversion from decimal to hex, and taught them all how to exploit these things over the course of a couple of days. I ran a workshop where I was just like, literally anyone who wants to come in, and I'll try and get you set up and at some level even teach you basic C and things like that and set up those environment. And one of the things that I was going to say, it goes back to this debate of like, are we a contest? Are we, trying to teach people things? Are we closer to a village? Are we this? It's very difficult to build challenges that don't turn into stump the chump, right?
Yeah.
And even if they are already highly tutorialized challenges, for most people walking in, you have such a wide variety of backgrounds that it's always going to feel like stump the chump to somebody. So even if it's tutorialized, it's still really hard to write a challenge that doesn't send people off into the weeds by accident, let alone on purpose. And so yeah.
I mean, like, so Blank Dash said in it is like, most challenge makers just want to F with people. For solvers, it's an immense pleasure solving one. So like, I found I love challenges. As I said, I was a player for a long time. I've competed in tons of competitions at DEF CON and other conferences. Like, I've won 2 black badges from doing it. And I say that because, oh goodness, there's a couple things. One, it's not the smartest person who wins. I know that sounds really weird, but it's like someone who knows how to play the game, who knows how to solve the challenges and leverage other people, because you can't know everything. Like, there's no experts in cybersecurity. So like, you had to rely on other people, especially like when there's a C challenge or, other ones. But going to like, you as a player, you knew immediately when you came across a challenge where the person built it to F with you. And I say that like, there was a Gherkin cryptography challenge where it was literally unsolvable because they expected you to make jumps and logic that no normal person would ever make. And those ones are really frustrating as a person. Like, probably like my favorite story of this one was, it's going to come out as a story for my black badge. But at one point I hit a piece of Braille that Gulo put in a very interesting spot, and it had C back, and it was the letter C, B-A-K, C back. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'm like, oh, okay. The book's based off of Darknet. It's Damon. There was there was Detective Seaback. That must be a reference to Seaback. And I started going down this giant rabbit hole for like 3 hours at 3 a.m. And then after 3 hours of bashing my head across it, I finally kind of like stepped away, and it hit me as see back, see back. It was see back, see the other side of the damn challenge. So I just had to go back to where I found the original thing, flip and look at the other side. Like and that's the thing is like with challenges, I think built to, people will F with themselves more than you can possibly imagine with challenges. So like you come across those ones where like where they're purposely messing with you. They're not fun on the player side, or at least that's my random tidbit there.
No, I think
Like-
you're dead on.
Gulo, go for it.
Gulo, did you have something?
He's muted. Gulo, I think you muted yourself. We'll come back to you. I think you might have to rejoin the stream really quick.
Gotcha.
So while he's rejoining, go on, Gulo. Gowrie.
Yeah, well, so what I was going to say was exactly this. Like red herrings and, Blank Dash has said that most of the challenge makers just want to screw with people. And I don't disagree with that because, I competed in a handful of CTFs, and there's a reason why I just straight up don't compete in CTFs anymore, because there's just so many CTFs out there that are either we're either going to teach you something. In a lot of cases, I'm beyond the beginner stuff, but there's value there. I'd rather be making those CTFs than playing them at this point. Or I competed in a number of them where the challenges had actual red herrings in them. And I spent like an hour and a half going down this red herring. And then I was talking to the challenge designer, and he was just like, all right, I'll give you a hint. You're going down the wrong path. Set this bit instead of that bit. It was a red herring. And I was just like, how frustrating for me that I just feel like I had my time wasted, to the extent that, there was a binary decision. I can either go down this path or I can go down that path. And because I made a decision on a path that the challenge developer gave me, I'm now an hour and a half behind every other team because I happened to make the wrong decision. And it was a 50-50 coin flip as to which path I was going down. That is a bad challenge, period. That is a bad challenge because you're not learning. What you're really learning there is that vulnerability research is hard, right? And so, like, you can, and this, it's a good lesson. It's a good lesson to a certain extent, but you're going to learn that lesson for the rest of your life, not in a 24 to 72 hour CTF. What you want to learn in a 24 to 72 hour CTF is an exposure to a wide array of problems, from, packet replay bugs and like reconstructing streams all the way down to binary exploitation. Not, I need to be more clever and think about what the challenge developers are going to do to me, right? You're not actually learning anything useful if you're thinking about what the challenge developers are trying to get you to do and throw you off the path. What you're learning there is how to play CTF, not computer security.
And right, because I want to hear from Gulo because he re-added, but just to double down on something you said, my strategy I use in any one I've ever played, which are kind of like the scoreboard systems where you have a bunch of different challenges and you're trying to solve them, not like one big linear path, but a bunch of them, is if I can't solve it, if I don't feel like I'm on the trunk of the problem, like the actual journey, I drop it and move on to another one. So as good as the challenge designer might be, if he makes that first, like, if he's not walking me down a path which feels real, I'm going to just abandon it and move on to the next one. Gulo?
So my challenges, some people may say that I have red herrings in my challenges, and I kind of disagree. Like the see back part, I didn't think that was such a logical jump, and the seeing the back of that challenge was really to screw with people anyways. And it was just people that were overthinking it. But I agree
that's my example.
Red herrings in there.
You didn't design that. My point is, like, you didn't design that as a red herring of C back. Actually, you found out later on that challenge was that the C fell off because the braille was in a tricky spot on the human body, which could easily be, I want to say rubbed off, but that's I'm gonna pull back on that one. The braille came off of the area and it caused this. My point is like, people will go down their own red herrings without challengers writing and coding them in.
Yeah, exactly.
And that'll always happen. That's you can't account for everyone. I write my quest, I write my challenges. They're all centered around something that I'm learning or something that I want to learn. And I write those challenges, I build them off of something that I'm learning. So the Braille challenges that I wrote were because I wanted to learn Braille. So I learned Braille so that I could make a Braille challenge and then teach other people Braille.
I'm having a
Right,
few
and I think
issues. Did it come through clear for everyone else? It seemed to bounce a little
the
bit.
audio came through
It's a little
fine.
spotty.
Okay.
Audio was fine. It was just the video. But to your point, Gulo, when we're going through and creating challenges, the fact is that folks are either wanting to learn the subject or they know a little bit about it, so that's why they want to create a quest. So that part always excites me, because when somebody wants to volunteer to do a quest and build it, it's because they're wanting to learn and they're passionate about it, which is awesome. And then typically we try to go through and make sure we've got some playthrough time on that, so where if we get more people to take a look at the quest beforehand, we can make sure there's not, as an external person looking at the quest, hey, I didn't understand this verbiage. Like if you're brand new to Linux, why don't you just go ahead and change directory over into this slash or slash home? Well, if you don't know how or what the command is for change directory, then that's going to leave a gap to where you either need to clearly say, hey, here's a research, or here's the man page, or here's an example of how you would change directory as part of the tutorial. So you learn a lot when you're trying to go through and create things from basically scratch. So a learning quest versus a challenge quest, where you have to be able to try to make a couple of those jumps and do some research. It's always very interesting to see.
So my quests are based upon, I don't feel comfortable with my quests until one of them has been completed. Once somebody in the darknet completes one of my quests, then I know that it's possible for others to figure them out, because some of my quests are teaching quests. They are very basic, and I walk you through, like I have cryptography challenges. I walk you through how to do Caesar ciphers, some of the oldest ciphers in the world that have ever existed, and I walk you through decades and centuries of these different ciphers so that you're learning how to break more and more ciphers as you go along. And that's more of a teaching challenge. But I also have my other challenges where you have to exploit web security, or even my hidden challenges where there's a lot of social engineering and you have to think outside the box. I don't necessarily have red herrings in any of those, but they're far more difficult. And until one person completes that quest, I don't know how difficult it is for somebody who's never seen it before versus how easy it is for somebody that's been in the industry. I wrote a networking challenge quest one year, and there was a guy that sat in front of me for 6 hours working on my challenge, swearing at me for 6 hours as he was doing this network challenge. It was like 13 commands. It was basic intro to networking security. And it's something that I've been doing for decades. And I would hope other network engineers do the same thing. But it took him 6 hours. And the next year I brought it back. There were people working on it for 14 hours before they solved it. And it's not that it was incredibly difficult. It's just they've never seen it before and they've never had to deal with it before.
Yeah. So I was going to say the one example, especially you want to talk about evil Gulo quests, and I can't say anything about this quest other than what it is on its face. Otherwise, you instantly get what it is, and it's like easily Googleable, I guess. And that is his ink blot. His ink blot challenge. And that's all I can say about it is you get a bunch of ink blots and you have to figure out what the result is. If you have literally never seen the thing that these ink blots are, then you will never in your life get it. But he can't just outright say, like, give a hint, because it'll just ruin the whole challenge too. So I think only a handful of people have solved that, and it's usually people who are in the know. And that's usually one that he would consider a challenge quest rather than a learning quest, because like maybe you learn what it is eventually, but it's hard to like teach you to recognize those things without telling you what they are up front.
Oh,
I think there's value.
That quest is so amazing. So I won't tell anyone the answers, but I constantly get messages on that quest. They're like, is this a Pokemon? Is this a leaf? Is this an alien? I'm like, Pokemon. So you still believe in Pokemon. So as a child, you never fully developed outside, and I just screw with people for days.
See, that's mean.
This is the part though where it's like that just depending on the challenge, like sometimes it's funny, other times it's just like really challenging. Like you're and then you find out what it is and you're like, wow, that was me finding a needle in the haystack and I get no reward for finding the needle. Like cool, yeah, there's a big pile of hay. Eventually I will find the needle. Sure, maybe there would be more value in me like building a program to determine it. And I mean, those are the ones which are remarkably frustrating. I think even like Blank Dash is talking about those is the ones where like you bash your face against the keyboard and you eventually like find the answer and you're like, wow, that was like remarkably disappointing because I didn't gain anything for all of this annoyance. And I think that's where you start going back and forth with, especially when it comes down to designing challenges, the ones that build on top of each other and ones that like lead you down like a learning path, or at least like you gain some value out of it. And I think this is where, when designing a lot of the challenges, going from like the player to now like building things, I underestimated how much you have to, this is going to sound like, odd, but like lead people by the nose to your challenge because especially in the darknet, they're exposed to web security and binary security and cryptography and all these other ones. So you almost have to label the challenge like this is a web security challenge. It's not an information gathering one. A good example of this is images. So like if I put an image on a web page, I really need to tell them this is a steganography challenge. This is a open source intelligence one where you're going to have to get details out of the images, because steganography is one you could spend 5 hours on an image and still never actually realize, oh, there's actually no steganography in here. It was like the image pointed to something else.
Right. And to your points on that, one of the things when we're talking about what makes good quests, what makes bad quests, whether it's challenges versus teaching, the other thing is I was afraid to go through and do CTS for years because I didn't think I had enough smarts to be able to actually jump in. And I avoided it. I was helping build challenges, but I wouldn't go participate because I had heard of other people having all these trip up marks and not ever getting past it. I only heard about the negative. I'm going to flip it on its head and talking about the positive is that I ended up going through and doing that at my local Southern California Linux Expo. It was a Linux Expo. Jumped in and I placed third. And I'm like, I don't know enough to be doing this. And it came down to I stopped pretending that I was going to place anywhere. And I just wanted to go learn one thing. And if I learned one thing from that CTF, then I accomplished my goal. So for me, I jumped in and this was more of a Jeopardy style CTF. I'm like, okay, this is talking about hacker culture. No problem. I can do this all day. And then other CTFs I've gone to is like, hey, we're going to have you take a memory dump from a Linux operating system that has yet to be released, that comes from the Terminator 9000, that you have to go through and create tools to go scrape this, grab the information for the username and password that's saved in memory. And I'm like, what is this going on? So getting to learn how do you go about doing that, you learn about tools like volatility, and then you can go deeper into something that you wouldn't have known before. So with that, go ahead, guys.
With those challenges, it's if you do any of my challenges, they don't always say what you're going to learn or what you're going to be doing. Generally, if you talk with anyone in the darknet, who either a player or any of the quest writers or any of the people that run it, they're going to say that his challenges are weird. His challenges are incredibly difficult. But you always learn something from them. Some things you will never forget, and you can only use sock puppets to describe later on in therapy. But you do learn things from them, like the Braille challenge. Someone who completed the Braille challenge is scarred for life. It's been like 7 years and he still hates me. And I get it and I understand it. But he knew more about Braille now than what he did before. The Rorschachs, the inkblot one, that was once you figured out what the trick was, all of them became super simple. But you learned you learned new nomenclature, you learned how to describe something, and you learned something that you didn't know before. And now you'd be able to go describe it to somebody else if you needed to. And it's all about growing and learning things. And so my challenges are shock challenges. My more difficult challenges will shock you in some way so that you don't forget the information while you're learning that information. I could make a simple challenge, and I generally do, that goes through and it walks you through step by step how to do something, but you may not remember that because there was nothing significant about it. It was cool, it may have been fun, but there's nothing that's going to scar you for life.
I think one of the tricks with a lot of at least the CTFs that I found, is you tend to find a tool set that the challenger likes writing in, like whether it's like, especially when it comes to ciphers, you find like, oh, okay, they're just going through a bunch of the Rumpkin ciphers, or oh, they're using CyberChef for most of their challenges. I think the one thing that was really frustrating with some challenges that I've come across, or CTFs, is that they don't realize there's other tools out there. So as a challenger, Rumpkin's not the only tool. CyberChef's not the only tool to deal with RC4. I can just do it with OpenSSL, and then all of a sudden it doesn't decompile correctly in that tool versus others. I think that's one thing that, as challenge makers become more advanced, they start realizing like, oh, we need to actually make sure that there's compatibility across all these different pieces.
Yeah, I can tell you, I learned so much from trying to write like the simplest binary exploitation challenges I could think of. I mean, we're talking like some of my challenges, I literally give you the source code to, and I tell you exactly what we're going to do. But just getting the tool sets of like teaching people how to use GDB and putting tutorials up about how to use those things, like it was a 5-year process to get somewhere where I was happy with, where let's say not everyone, like if I were to go crazy, I would break down like a quest on how to use GDB, and then a quest on how to use Python, and then a quest on, and like break those down. But I got to the point where I was like 9 quests. I wrote a bunch of tutorials with them. And now a relative beginner who's at least seen C before can maybe interact with it and be able to learn how to use GDB in the process and things like that. But when I jumped in originally, I pulled out a bunch of random CTF challenges that I had seen before, tossed them up on the board, and then was just like, 2 people did my challenges out of, 500 players. Mm-hmm. Why is that? And it's because the average person that we got that came in was not a vulnerability researcher. It was not somebody who had done binary exploitation or reverse engineering. And I had to, sit down and really think like, well, how would I teach somebody how to do that? I've been through multiple courses where either I've been told how to do, what vulnerabilities look like. I've been through multiple courses like that in college, but I also went through this like 3-month reverse engineer, 8 hours a day sitting in a seat for, every 5 days a week. All we're going to do is reverse engineer things and show you patterns of those things. And that took 3 months until I felt really comfortable just being able to sit down in front of assembly and be like, okay, I can describe what's going on here, right? And I had to be like, how am I going to break this down into a chunk that someone can walk in and walk out in a weekend and feel like they have some small amount of exposure to it where they think they can run off and try the next level step, right?
Well, also feel some excitement. Feel some excitement that they've actually accomplished something. Like, it's one thing, it's like, okay, cool, I've just learned a ton of different syntax for GDB, but I don't feel like I didn't see the overflow happen. Like, and I think that's one piece I've gotten out of your challenges too, is that feel like hacking is not that interesting. There's a reason why in movies you have graphics flying all over the place and things like that, because it's not that interesting. Like, I feel we've had this conversation before where like you hit enter and you get a shell back and you're like, oh my gosh, this is great, in the crowd, and no one notices because you're in your basement working. But like, it's things like that. It's taking the things that like that feel exciting and make sure that person gets access. But that was one of the things I got out of your challenges. You get them to the point where they're hitting they're hitting it right away.
Yeah, so I thought it was really important from the very beginning of the design of these things that at the end of every challenge, like you could exploit them locally, but that wouldn't get you the flag. So at the end of every challenge, you actually had to fire it against a live server, which meant that you were, doing whatever it was, and then that had the response of giving you the flag. And once you got up to like level 6, I think, you actually spawned a shell on the box, which meant that you had a remote code execution on the box. And that is really that, like, if you get up to challenge 6, like not all the way to challenge 9, because that's when we start getting into like, I'm going to teach you how to write assembly, like an actual assembly program, a complicated one. If you go from 1 to 6 in a weekend, you will go from like not knowing, like if you've never done any exploitation at all to doing that, realize that like out of the billions of people on Earth, you're probably in the hundreds of thousands, or like maybe in the low millions of peoples out of those billions that have ever launched a shell and actually actively exploited something on a server somewhere, which is really satisfying. Now, like I was going to get back to the flip side of this is, what did I learn in this process, and going to saying like how hard it is not to have issues when people are hitting the challenges on their box, like they're working with the binaries and they're trying to make sure it works before they fire it against the server. Oh man, modern operating systems are actually pretty damn secure, and so they mitigate almost everything now that these traditional stack buffer overflows you require to be able to exploit them. Things like address space randomization is turned on, and data execution prevention is turned on, and this and that and this and that. So I was starting to get to this point where I was just like, all right, here's a virtual machine now that is set up and works exactly the way you need it. And it's like, oh, but that is like a gigabyte download, and not everyone wants to sit there and download a whole gigabyte of, whatever off of the Wi-Fi that may be spotty and things like that. So now we're getting into the spot where like I have to come up with the challenges where they can interact with it on the server and test it and debug it on the server and then finally fire it. Like it's getting to be really complicated. And actually it taught me a heck of a lot about like, how is OS X configured versus Linux versus Windows versus like, what are the troubles with Bash on Windows in an emulator versus Bash on, on Linux standard, and like, what does the command prompt on OS X look like, and do my solutions work in all of these environments? I've learned an extraordinary amount about how bad technology is and how inconsistent it is across platforms.
The weekend before DEF CON, Firefox released an update that hosed my entire challenge because it was built around identify cross-site scripting and finding these type of vulnerabilities, which are all client side, and they released an update that just completely hosed cross-site scripting on the front end. So like this is like I sympathize with you're having to program vulnerabilities, and this is probably the next segment, which is so like I grew up, my entire background is on breaking things. Like I never was a developer, which is really weird, as like when I moved into like the penetration testing and web security realm, I didn't have strong programming, but it let me think outside the box a lot better. But now that I'm like turning into like building a lot of more tools and building a dashboard for clients to be able to see vulnerability data, it is remarkably hard, one, to create like secure code. Like you have to think about it, but then creating secure, insecure vulnerability, like creating challenges which you have to run on an AWS system, which are built to be buffer overflowed, but don't actually give the person like full blown remote code execution, is like mind-numbingly hard.
Yes.
So I had a challenge way back when that was the web security challenge. You had to learn cross-site scripting, SQL injection, and I had some very like in-depth how you could add code to JPEGs to take over servers. I believe Silk completed those challenges way back in the day, and those were all active challenges. So somebody in the darknet, I think it was Nolan, approached me and was like, "Hey, can I take over and rewrite your quests? And I want to build my own version of these and just take them over." I'm like, "Cool. I haven't updated these in forever. They're all yours. Here's my code." And I send him my code, and the message I get back was, "Holy crap. You actually have live vulnerabilities. Your SQL injection is truly a SQL injection. You're not faking it. They're actually using SQL injection on your web server." And I go, "Yeah, that was the easiest way of doing it, was giving them access. And if anything ever happened to that server, the automation process blows it out and rebuilds it again."
Yep.
I didn't care about the server. I didn't care about anything other than making it as real as I possibly could. And he's like, "Yeah, no, I'm building this. It's going to be pretend." I was like, "Well, that works too."
Yep.
Zero Altitude, his challenge had a really funny one. So it was made around, someone who you had to learn how to code and script your attack. And he just had a Docker container that rebooted every 60 seconds. And this was like part of one of the boss fight. I think he called it the Crucible. And it was just a Docker container that rebuilt itself every 60 seconds. So there was no way of getting in there. So you had to like script it and then figure out the next part within that time frame. And that was his way. It was active exploitation, but just rebooted every 60 seconds and rebuilt it. So that one had to be one of the more fun ones too.
There was
Learning
a
in time with-
CTF. There was a CTF challenge I did way back when. It was actually one of the qualifiers for the DEF CON CTF. And it was a terminal. It was you had SSH into, or you had to telnet into something, and it was a video game where you were driving a cursor. So your cursor was a C, it was a car. You had to hit every Z and every P. So you had to run over every pedestrian and every zebra, but you had to dodge all the W's because it was water. You had to dodge all the pipes and underscores because they were walls. And you only had X amount of time to complete the race, and they made it so it was impossible for a human to complete it. So you had to write your own logic to play the game for you, which had randomized obstacles that were appearing on the screen to move the cursor from side to side, forwards and backwards, to dodge obstacles and kill zebras and pedestrians. It was so much fun. Super hard to do, but it was so much fun to do.
This kind of falls into like what Mansel's won. So like one of the boss fights. So in Darknet, we typically have a bunch of these smaller quests, and then we have the boss fight, which is the usually ones that forces everyone to come together. So like one of the ones I remember, which was just so much fun, was at one point, I think it was like Saturday night, the Daemon, which effectively was a website at the time, all of a sudden the whole website changed and it got corrupted. Again, this was like the hacker's interpretation of it getting corrupted. So all of it was glitching and the text was garbled and things like that. This is like one of the joys of having like Zero Altitude did so much work on that front end interface, just making it look so cool. But it was that the challenge on that boss fight was everyone coming together. Oh goodness, I kind of lost my train of thought when I was talking about it, but it was everyone coming together, which ended up having to work on these larger challenges together. I forgot where I was going.
Are you talking about the thermostat one?
Oh no, it was the thermostat one. Thank you. Was that you had to build the automation around it? So this one you had to use the JavaScript library, which would do the machine learning. Yeah, we had to solve the capture, so you had to do the machine learning to capture it. The other one was actually the text-based adventure game where you had to program the solution to actually go to each one of the rooms. What are some of the bigger boss fights that you remember?
Digital Tinker said it was TensorFlow. Yep, and there was the mud room that was created.
Yep, I do remember that now. Yeah, TensorFlow was the one I was thinking of. Amazingly enough, has a Node.js package, which was where I started programming that one in.
Nice.
The boss fight that I remember the most, so I generally don't take part in the boss fights. I think I've had one challenge in the boss quest in the 10 years I've been doing Darknet. The one that I remember the most was sitting around and watching people strip a Cat5 cable and attach leads to it so that they could actually pull data off of the wire in transit without ever disconnecting the wire. So this was a live, two computers communicating. You had to strip the wires back, attach leads to it, and then connect it to something so that you could read the data that was coming across the wires live without ever disconnecting it. And they accomplished it. So the Darknet is, you work on these challenges. Generally, I really hope that you're working with other people, so you're working with Hollands or groups to learn these things, but a lot of people will compete in them as individuals. And then the boss fight is where it's like, holy crap, it's a community. You can't solve the boss fight generally by yourself. You have to involve others, or you're a complete and utter badass that just doesn't need to compete in it anyways because it's just too easy. But it's bringing everyone together. It's taking the knowledge from everything you've learned in the past 3 days and pitting it against something that is super difficult. It's usually timed. We always stop at the appropriate time every year, and you must complete it in that time. And if you complete in that time, then everyone's exhausted. They all want to pass out, but they're also on a huge high because, oh my God, that was super difficult. There was so much stress involved. And I learned something so complex and so interesting that I'm going to go share this with everyone I know for all of eternity.
Well, I mean, a lot of them, we try and build it so it requires like 2 groups to solve different parts of it. Like we had one thing within the mud at one point we were playing with where you had to be 2 groups had to solve 2 different challenges and effectively push a button at the same time. So one group couldn't be in one place. So you had to kind of coordinate it. The TensorFlow one, we kind of did something similar where one person had to solve this piece and move the thermostat up while the other person had to solve this other piece and then activate the HVAC system. So typically like those were the ones which were really interesting because it pulls you, like, I think for me, some of the funnest challenges within Darknet were ones that really started to meld, we'll call it like the hacker's movie type feeling with actual hands-on keyboard. And that's where like Gowry's buffer overflows were always so much fun because at one point he had it hooked up to like, was it like an industrial control system, I think, that you were actually launching exploits into where you could see like a visual representation?
Somebody else did that,
Okay.
where we had some industrial control systems. I don't remember that particular challenge. That might have been Gate Herder that had something like that.
Yeah, I think it was Gate Herder.
Yeah, most of mine were focused on just like teaching C and teaching assembly and then teaching this particular class of bug and getting you exposed to those things. Okay. What I wanted to talk a little bit about was the badges and like some of the behind the scenes and some of the code base for it, because I don't think like that's one of the things that like we put out the badge year after year and it's always feature full, but we never really talk about or like do code walks or like any of the never really talk about what goes into it. Let like the hardware itself, I mean, command code and Crux are typically the ones that like Command has been working on it for the past couple of years. He's been the one that's been producing, especially this last badge, the Darknet 8 badge, was mostly him with help from Crux, but mostly him. And then I was focused on mostly the software stuff and helping to get those things worked out while he was making the hardware work. So I posted some code snippets, which is the game master from the last badge, which is only one piece of the badge, right? Like there's a whole web server running, which runs command codes challenges, and he has a few other challenges on the badge. And there are things that go into developing, like there's 3 different sets of games that I programmed into this badge. There was the exploitable ones, which we'll talk about that in a second. Those are complicated. There's the brain fuck emulator where, you would pass in BF programs and then execute them. And it was asking for specific ones. And then that was also an exploitable challenge. And then I had 3D Tic-Tac-Toe, which was I reused DEF CON qualifiers thing that I had solved years ago, and I re-implemented it inside the badge. Something that most people probably don't really think about, although most reverse engineers and most people who are very adept at CTF, everything, because it's a closed system on the badge, everything you need in order to solve a challenge has to be on the badge, right? Including the keys, including the actual flags for the challenge. That means that if I were to dump the binary, I could just read all the flags. So like as we're sitting there figuring out how to put these things onto the badge, we also have to figure out how to obfuscate the actual process of doing this. And like, so I think I put in a function, like I had to write an entire framework so that I could write games in an agnostic manner and then put an encrypted quote unquote, but it's really some encoded flag and respond with that after it's been decoded with a specific key that is also on the badge, right? So like you could go through this badge, reverse engineer it, find that encryption key, dump the particular keys if you could identify which strings are the actual flags, and then dump all the flags. That's probably more work than just solving 3D tic-tac-toe, but like that's a totally legitimate way of attacking this.
Mind you, though, this is like one of those things is you have limited memory space on the badge to do that. Like that's a big piece of this. It's not like, oh, I can just create a big encrypted framework or anything like that. You have limited space in which you have to do all the obfuscation and everything like that.
So this badge in particular, if you have one of these, one of the reasons, like there's a weird quirk about this badge, and it is that you cannot have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth active at the same time. And that is because of a memory limit. We could not get them both to enable because we use free RTOS on the badge. And the Bluetooth libraries, like there was two different memory limits. There's the actual RAM limit, and then there's the actual the ROM limit, like the area that we're storing it to. I don't know the hardware very well. The like command's probably like, he's got it all wrong, but whatever. But there we were struggling to get all of the components we needed to actually program onto the badge in the non-volatile memory. And then we also had a RAM limit. And we ran into the RAM limit when we initialized both Wi-Fi and Bluetooth at the same time.
Yep.
So in order to enable the Bluetooth stuff, you actually have to like go into the settings and say, I want to enable Wi-Fi is enabled. I want to enable Bluetooth, and then reboot the badge. And so it's really, really weird in that sense. And if you want to do the Wi-Fi challenges, you have to do it the other way. And that's because there was a memory limit. Like that was just reality. We couldn't get around that. And one of the reasons why this is really bad, this badge in particular has the ability to do over-the-air updates, which we never actually ended up needing because we did such an amazing job. But
yeah,
you know,
it's a good thing we activated that. Like all of a sudden, like all this pain, you were telling this story because you're a jerk, and this needs to be in print right now.
Yeah. So here's the thing: we got OTA working. And we were in Vegas that year, like the week beforehand, and we were working on the OTA stuff like 5 days before the conference. And like, that's how down to the wire it was. And I finally got it working with a sample on a Raspberry Pi and one of our developer kit badges. And I was like, cool, it works. Except that when we actually flashed it onto the real badge, we ran into a memory limit issue again, where if I rebooted the badge into the OTA, it would try to initialize Wi-Fi or try to initialize Bluetooth, one of those two. And we attempted to initialize the whole thing. And then we would do the OTA update, but we would run out of memory to actually download the OTA package and then update it. Well, we didn't figure that out because like I had already tested it. I thought we were good. And then we were in the middle of packaging everything up into the kit.
We had just finished.
And I was like, I'm gonna go work on a game just to see if I can slam one more in there before we actually ship. And I was like, cool, I put this one extra challenge in there, and I was like, let me test the OTA. I tried to reboot and it kept resetting on me, and I was just like, oh my god,
I'm literally at the end of the line.
I was like, if we need to do any updates, I was like, if we need to do any updates to this that increases the amount of RAM usage at all, we are SOL. So I figured out the fix, which was exactly that, flipping the bit of Wi-Fi versus Bluetooth and only enabling the Wi-Fi as opposed to also the Bluetooth when we're in the OTA session. And this is what it was. I couldn't even initialize free RTOS. without running out of RAM. So I was only able to actually initialize the ESP32, like some subsection of the system, the Wi-Fi, and then the OTA stuff, and I figured out how to do it. And then we had to crack. How many did we make? 2,000?
1,100 packages. We had literally.
Gosh.
Yeah, we had to crack open 1,100 packages and reprogram every single one the day before the conference, and
The night.
it was just one of those. It was just one of those
night before
moments.
That's the night
conference.
Yeah,
That
it was just one of those
supposed to be
moments.
CAFCON's first meeting, and that's like, hey guys, digital tits, hold on, can you take all this stuff and go to the suite because we need to reflash some badges after we just got done doing it for the last 6 hours.
I remember like me and Gowry had not eaten like for like the entire day, and someone just like, I'm gonna go get food and burgers, and I think it was the Tits Holon who just came along and just like gave us food. It was awesome.
Here's the thing, like, because like I think we've still told this story before, but not to this extent. Here's like the decision making that we had to sit down and go through. If this badge had some kind of critical issue that made anything not work, where some subsection of quests that we really wanted people to be able to have, like the Bluetooth drivers failing, whatever, if we had found a critical failure in the badge during the conference, we were going to do our best to make it right to ensure that everyone could get an update and work on those challenges, because we were very dedicated to it. And we have done that in the past. In like three or four different conference years, we've had to reflash every single badge. So that moment where we realized that our update plan was failed, and the only solution we would have had would have been to manually, put their stuff onto the jig and reprogram them. We had to make the decision: do we make new jigs for already assembled badges to re-update them because our jigs didn't work for fully assembled badges? Or do we crack open 1,100 badges and reprogram them? And the answer was, like, I remember sitting down at the table between 5 of us, and we were like, are we doing this? And it only took a crack second. We were like, we're doing it. Like, it's better to get it done. And then I'll tell you, like, best decision we ever made. One, didn't actually need the over-the-air updates, but best decision we ever made because we knew we could just walk away from the badge, and if there was a critical issue, I could just deal with it from my laptop from wherever I was in the entire conference. And then somebody had the Raspberry Pi to be like, hey, come here, push these buttons, stand here, connect to the thing, you're good, walk away.
Well,
and it gave
someone out there is now thinking, wait, you were gonna do over the airwaves at DEF CON, and we had like Faraday cage bags where you would just have the Raspberry Pi inside. You'd stick your hand inside this bag. That sounds terrifying, by the way. Just stick your hand in this bag with these random electronics.
I tried. I discussed with everyone, I'm like, hey, can I fill the bag with like non-conductive Jello? Just so when they put their hand in there, they're like, oh, and no one would let me. It was so mean.
So I still have those bags. I also learned interesting lessons to where not only is all that code available for folks to still play with the badge now, you can also build the Pi to flash your own over-the-air update. So that's available for everybody. So I had learned an interesting lesson on that with those the Faraday bags. You can't just put a blank Raspberry Pi in there without a case because it will short things out. So I shorted out a Pi, and I had like 5 backup Pis. So I'm like, put this in the case, put this here, shove it in the bag, and then, hey, we're up and running. Let's keep on rolling with this thing.
How many years ago was that badge? Was that 4 years ago?
We had...
Yeah.
So this was 3 years at this point because we had virtual and physical last year. We had virtual only. So it was the year before with this badge.
So 3 years ago, and we were just in the Discord channel talking about things, and we were talking about the different viruses, and this was the badge where you could contract STDs. And
no, this one wasn't.
That's this one.
That's the next one.
Oh, that's that one. Okay,
I had the rare red
4 years ago.
Version.
So
that one was the year before.
4 years ago then. And so it was last week or the week before we were talking about that badge, and you can contract like avian flu, STD, all kinds of different viruses and stuff. And we were talking about, I was like, hey, this is how the cures work. This is how things work. And then Digital Tinkerer went through and he's like, I have now cured every disease that my badge has. It had been over 4 years since he received the badge, and he still had chlamydia, but now he is cured for the moment.
So I
Just
want
don't
to
let
talk.
anybody plug in an eggplant.
I actually want to talk a little bit about this badge because this badge was a nightmare.
That was my favorite badge. I'll be honest,
It
that
is-
was absolutely my favorite.
It's my favorite badge, but from the developer side was an absolute nightmare because you think of these things as just one badge, one processor. This badge has two co-processors, right? You see two screens? That's because there are two processors, right? And there's an ESP32 that's right on the top that we ended up using only that one, and then we have a microcontroller on here to drive the LEDs. And then there's another one that actually handles a lot of I forget what it's like an STM or something like that. And so
STM32.
in order to develop on this badge, the developer kit, you had to get two separate boards, wire them together, flash them, boot them, try and get the clock right, and all of those things. And then finally, when you were done all of that, we had such a pain actually getting the message passing between the two to speak the right thing. And I think at one point there was like an endianness issue that I ran into, and it was so frustrating, and that I like was vehement about this. I was just like, only one coprocessor next year, or one processor. For the love of God, please, just one. It simplifies the whole thing, because the ESP32, you could write stuff in like Vim or whatever thing you want to use, and then compile it
MicroPython.
with,
Yep.
there was like basically this the board support package set up where I could do it, but I didn't have to use a whole test bench or whatever. The STM was Java. Like, I think it was Java. If I remember correctly, it was Java, and there was like, you had to download Eclipse and like get it
Eclipse.
working on
I had
that.
to write the 100-page write-up, dude. That was
My God.
disgusting.
The development process on this badge was an absolute nightmare. Absolute nightmare. And then when we finally simplified it down to one ESP32, it was like, okay, we have a Vagrant, I think it's a Vagrant emulation or whatever, or jail that we set up, and you could download. So like now, I just did this the other day, like a few weeks ago. I wanted to see if I could get the package from this badge running in QEMU, because what is I forget the people who make the ESP32, but there's an ESP32 QEMU machine. Yeah, Espressif. They released a QEMU machine for it. I was like, oh, let me see if I get it working. And I had to like turn off all of the graphics stuff, and just to see if I could get it booting. And that Vagrant thing, like, it's still up there. You can download it in like a couple of button clicks. I had it working on WSL2 in like an afternoon, and I was flashing a badge later that weekend, and I was like, oh, I love Gator so much. Like, this is so perfect. I could hit a button and have my development environment back up from 3 years ago and just get rolling. But yeah, little bit of tidbit from background on the badges.
Yeah, the badges. Oh, go on, Gator.
I was gonna say that was also due to command code as well, because we were hey, what's gonna be our development platform? And we're like, okay, it's gonna be Ubuntu. Okay, we'll do Eclipse. And then he was the one who ended up making the Vagrant build and then putting it up online. I just got documentation pushed along with it, making sure this idiot could go through and follow along, because if I can do it, anybody can. So at that point, it makes it to where we can still do it today. Hand it back to you.
Yeah,
Also, go ahead.
These assholes, I was perfectly happy running Arch, building my stuff, contributing where I needed to contribute. And they're like, hey, you're building a challenge for the badge. Can you set up this development environment so that you can build that? I've been running Ubuntu for the past 4 years now because I had to change over my entire life to work on this one freaking challenge.
You know what? So much of the badges, I'll be honest, it's just been like magic to me. Like, I am in no way involved in any of the badge development, but some of the crazy things you have done, though, I think my favorite one, because it launched into like Gator's story, is one of the earlier badges. So one of the challenges which I massively exploited to get a lot of points to be able to win the first few years was because badge pairing gave you a set number of points. So you'd go and pair badges, but the coolest way is the way you got those codes off of your badge is it simulated a keyboard. You'd plug in a USB, you'd plug it into your computer, point it into a notepad, and it'd dump them all out. Let's not even talk about the fact that you're like, it just baffles me with badge life becoming such a thing at DEF CON. It cracks me up because like these things run a full system. Like they run a full system and we just like plug them into our computer all the time at like, don't plug random chips into your computer, but you know, it's Darknet, why not? But you'd plug it in and it would type out all the codes. And my favorite story from DEF CON probably is when Gator got interviewed by a news channel about our about our badge. And it was like the perfect, like, you think these things don't happen or like you want to like respect the news, but they came into DEF CON looking for a story. And here's Gator explaining our badge. He's explaining the badge, talking about how you pair it and challenges an MMORPG. In the clip they grabbed was you just plug it into the computer and it dumps out all the codes. And they grabbed the clip and put it towards hackers at DEF CON are now hacking all the systems and taking over credit cards. All you have to do is clip over to Gator. You just plug it in and it dumps out all the codes. And now they are coming for your children. More at 12 tonight. And
yep.
What is
baby
going
monitors
on?
and the whole bit. I was like, so that was the year that DEF CON then said next year, no media is coming and you have to be clearly wearing things because they took a lot of clips way out of context. And I'm like, I am so pissed because I thought
you can still find it.
Oh, yeah. I linked to it because it's stupid. It's so, I mean, go just look up NBC super hackers. And I am just a 5-second clip in this 5-minute video of, hey, we're hacking baby monitors instead of talking about how the things that we're actually trying to make sure people are aware that the industry is full of holes. We're trying to be able to help address that and fix it, like the hardware hacking village. When we're talking about the voting hacking village, when we're talking about hacking cars, we're here to bring awareness and try to fix it. But hey, we can just plug in the USB and dump out all the codes because that's fun.
Whenever
I
they
need to do a video of that. Like, legitimately, I need to do a video of just that clip because it's just like they're coming for your children. More at 11. And just like it's
when
so
they
bad.
approach you, they have this little piece of paper that's an NDA generally that says, "Hey, can we use your likeness and what you're saying on the air?" Personally, they do now, or they have to now, but don't sign those.
No. So that's why I wasn't in the documentary for 20 because after, on that year I got burned so bad. I'm like, there is no way. I don't care if you're officially blessed by DEF CON or not. My last experience wasn't so good. I'm just glad I didn't get my handle or my name at that point because hey, it's on NBC. This is cool.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
Still one of my favorites. Still one of my favorites.
When you show up on 60 Minutes and all of your relatives and friends start actually messaging you going, "Did I just see you on 60 Minutes?" No.
Right.
All I was going to say, the last thing about the badge, the one thing that I was a little upset with, and like I learned a lot over the, like you talk about the things you're trying to teach other people setting up these games. Like I basically had never done embedded systems development until 4 or 5 years ago when I started helping Command with the badge. And now like I'm sitting down and I was like, man, wonder if I could write an emulator for our badge and like get those things up. And like that's the direction that I want to go, is to be able to have a virtual badge in the future where we're able to just simulate one of our old badges would be really cool. But one of the things I learned from doing this badge is I had never seen the ESP32 architecture before. And it's expressive. There's like a specific architecture that's a little different on the ESP8266 or something like that. I couldn't figure out how to do a buffer overflow challenge on this. I really, really wanted to, but I couldn't figure it out because it's a little weird because they do register rotations or register banking. And I was just like, oh, crap, I haven't actually had to exploit one of these systems this way. And since then, I've figured it out. But I was looking up how to do it. and the only talk I could find on how to exploit the ESP32 was like a DEF CON talk from 2019. Like, it is brand new. Like, no one had ever done it before. And I was sitting here trying to figure out how to write a challenge. I was like, oh, that's why this is really hard.
Well, it's like, it goes back to that. Like, it is really hard making secure, insecure challenges. Like, you look at like Hack the Box and things like that. There's a reason they just spin them all up into Dockers, because it's a remarkable amount of work to go, okay, I need to make sure a buffer overflow actually executes and they can run whatever shellcode they want, but it doesn't give access to everything. We've been doing this inside like our company, trying to create challenges for like new people interviewing and things like that, which is the whole story in and of itself. But like, we look at each other and like, where do we run these things? Like, I don't want to run it in like an AWS. So we spun up in a completely separate AWS environment, which doesn't touch any, like, it's legitimately an organization account on its own, because I'm like, I'm not running these things in anything that we own, and then it just we spin up an environment just for them and they SSH in. But like, running a buffer writing a buffer overflow on the badge is just bonkers to me.
The one thing I was going to say about that is I was actually really proud of that last badge, because there were 5 or 6 of the challenges that I wrote. You could connect to the badge over a serial terminal on your phone and complete it. And I was like, that I had to learn how to write a freaking Bluetooth driver to do that, to be able to, talk Bluetooth. And I was like, because memory constrained, like, I had to figure out how to cram those things down into small transactions. But yeah, that was something I was really happy about.
So to your point, when we're talking about the badge was made for folks to be able to learn how to solder and then all these other physical things. But one of the things that we wanted to make sure as part of the Darknet and part of the culture that we're trying to build around DEF CON, we're trying to send you to different places inside of DEF CON. Or if you couldn't make it, before it went virtual, we had a lot of our quests and things that you could learn online, and you didn't have to be there physically in person. So you could probably do 90% of the quests and learn something without physically being there, which was awesome. And honestly, with where 2020 came around and then everybody went virtual for everything, it was pretty easy for us to be able to make that switch over and do the same thing. So now that we're finally, it looks like, knocking on wood, that we're getting out of that, we're going to be able to start getting back to physical. I am super excited to start seeing people again, because I miss people. I need to see people again. To communicate with people.
I think that's a good spot to start wrapping up. I am looking forward to DEF CON 30, like, for so many reasons. Obviously, since we're doing video and we're doing hangouts, like, there's just so many more opportunities to meet more people, and I'm freaking pumped about that. Gator, why don't you start wrapping us up?
I am getting pumped for DEF CON as well. I'm glad that everybody was able to jump on. Right now, the darknet-ng.network site, we're revamping things. One thing that we didn't get into is we made our own front end and back end to running our own engine for years. And that was a lot of work from a lot of people. The site right now directs to a video with just some of those faces and some of the things for those people, because the team is like 30 people large, and it's grown and shrunk a little bit, but without all their love and dedication to this, just literally trying to give back to the community, we wouldn't be here, which is the awesome part. There has now come up other open source projects like CTFD, which is what we've used the last couple of years. And because we had created something from source, because there wasn't anybody filling that need. So I'm super excited to keep on learning. I'm excited to see people. I'm excited to see our community continue to grow. And just, hey, make sure to go love your hacker family. Gallery.
The last couple of years have been weird, but don't worry. We are not going anywhere. DEF CON Darknet is going to be around. So stick around and see what we got coming up. Gulo?
We're all here. We're all volunteers. We don't get paid for this. We don't. Silk doesn't give us, and we got a couple of animations from Silk.
You don't get paid?
No,
I
get
what?
No, I don't. I don't get paid.
But we're all volunteers. We spend hundreds and hundreds of hours every year setting this up because we're giving back to the community. We're trying to grow everyone else up to levels to help people learn, to help them get better jobs, to help make things more secure, and to build this family that Gator loves so much. And that's just what we are, and that's who we are.
I thank you for joining us on another Hacker Hangouts. I mean, it's only February, but feels like DEF CON is right around the corner. I cannot wait. I cannot wait to meet so many people watching the stream, seeing the people that I love to hang out with, and meeting new people and doing more hangouts. So thank you for watching, and hack on.